fourth speaker today is a member of a German organisation called the Homeland, formerly known as the National Democratic Party. From humble beginnings as a landscaper to becoming the deputy leader of his organisation, Sasha has demonstrated great virtue and strength of character throughout his time in politics. He is an example to us all, and this is doubly true given that he is based in Germany, which has been undoubtedly the hardest hit by the New World Order's agenda. He is a champion for the memory of Dresden and a critic of Israel with plenty of controversy following him on both issues, with him being branded by the mainstream as a racist, a homophobe, and an anti-Semite. So he's a nice guy.
And he's proud of it.
It is a real pleasure to have him here with us today. So please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Sasha Russmuller.
Really great, kind introduction. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear comrades, Laura, Mark, my heartfelt greetings from Germany, from my party and the magazine, the publication I'm writing for, and thanks for the invitation to this really exciting event. I highly appreciate that, and it's amazing. It really means a lot to me being here today, having the opportunity to give a speech, however, not just to give a speech, but moreover, which I think is crucial, to hold several bilateral talks for networking purposes and exchanging our business cards, exchanging our experiences and exchange our ideas. And so please don't be shy about stalking me this weekend in that regard. For those who, even after that kind of introduction, who don't have any clue why I'm here and who I am, a few words to introduce myself. My name is Sasha Russmuller, a resident of Bavaria, Germany, freelance journalist, book author, politically active since my early youth. Some voices claim since the first trimester of my mother, but that's not correct. It started a little bit later. I've held numerous offices in the party formerly known as the NPD, now rebranded to Die Heimat, as much as the homeland. And I'm writing regularly for the German monthly magazine, Deutsche Stimme, translated as much as German Voice, where I had the honor to interview also Laura and Mark. And occasionally I write for other publications, sometimes even in the English language. And as I cannot rely on the routine of my mother tongue today, please excuse any linguistic mistakes, or eventually my presumption, if I should maybe at last partly dispense the script or leave the eyes from the script and occasionally talk to you occasionally, maybe a little bit more freely or with more eye contact as I'm accustomed regarding to my speeches in Germany. 2 times I had the honor of having been invited to Mark Collett's Patriotic weekly review. And the last time it was shortly after I had the pleasure to meet him the first time in person at the Awakening Conference in Finland back in April this year. And after featuring in that show, Mark asked me to participate at this year's PA conference. And I didn't hesitate 1 second, happily to accept that invitation to this amazing event. And believe me, I'm glad to succeed in entering the stage and not having been handcuffed at the airport to find myself behind bars. In the name of freedom, of course, and democracy, or sometimes democracy. At times I wondered, and I discussed it with my wife, whether the safest way to enter the soil of the United Kingdom maybe would be to make a stopover in Calais, northern France, and jump into a rubber dinghy. Nevertheless, I tried it by the aeroplane, and it worked out well. But when arriving yesterday, pretty quickly, I remembered Mark Collett's speech in Helsinki, as he warned the Finnish audience not to allow Helsinki to become like London and Birmingham and some other British cities. And indeed, Mark, just a few moments when I arrived at the airport and was picked up driving outside Manchester, there's really a bit of a demographic difference between Helsinki and Manchester. I did a look then yesterday on the internet and learned that the Labour Party has long held a majority on the city council. I think that explains a lot. By the way, we face the same problems regarding huge cities drowning in foreign infiltration in too many German metropolises too, be it in Munich, Nuremberg, Frankfurt and others, in an accelerating tendency since 2015, the year of Hells Angela Merkel's political cardinal sin of open borders. And here in the UK, I think it was the Blair government that worked more diligently than any other government before to ensure that the vision of a multicultural Britain would endure regardless of who next became Prime Minister, except its name was Mark Collett or Laura Towler, what I would prefer. And if I'm informed correctly, 3 million immigrants were admitted to the country during Blair's time in office. And since then, an additional round about 8 million have joined them under consecutive, allegedly conservative prime ministers. Of course, conservatives in name only, inherently for sure 100% Blairites. And that's the problem we face all over Europe, at least in Western Europe. And the consequences are the same regarding exploiting the welfare systems provided by the input of the native citizens, and regarding the victims that are sexually assaulted or otherwise violently attacked by those exploiting, quote-unquote, cultural enrichers. Be it in Germany or Britain. In the countless cases of knife-wielding spree killers, there's always a diagnosis of psychological disorder, of course, in reduction of punishment, without adding, however, that this particular psychological disorder has an undeniable connotation of religion and migration. And what we are experiencing in terms of migration is no longer just a loss of control. What's practiced here is the deliberate and purposeful renunciation of control. Today's systematic replacement policy, and I want to strengthen that term and pronounce systematic. Today's systematic replacement policy is a non-negligent high treason towards Europe's indigenous ethnicities. The autochthonous, the indigenous people who built our home countries are left in the lurch, and the traditional feminists, so crucial and important for our future, are betrayed. One is allowed to choose what gender you want, while climate hysteric career politicians dictate what heating you're allowed to have. At least in Germany, that's more or less indeed the case. That's the problem if we have the Greens. Today, those warmongers are more olive greens in the government. You can choose your gender, not your heating. Unfortunately, that's not the only result of an insane, ideologically induced mental distortion. And so to give you an impression of nowadays Germany without a long rigmarole, let's explain it this way. When once, based on a particular working ethics and skills, made in Germany pushed us to the top. Today, mad in Germany engulfs us in the abyss societally, economically, and morally. That's the sad truth of Germany these days. But we really don't need woke politicians with dozens of pronouns but no serious content, neither in demographic, nor social or economic terms. And here's the problem. Our governments, be it the German one or be it the British one, our governments don't run the country, they don't run the economy, they ruin the country, they ruin the economy. And there are multiple ways, I know, to ruin an economy. Too much to mention them all here. However, I'm sure our governments know them all. And it's interesting to speak about this topic here in Great Britain, that one disastrous economic wrecking ball has its headquarters in Brussels. I'm talking about the sovereignty sponge of financial redistribution called the European Union, the Union of Joint Liabilities and Heteronomy. By Brexit, a majority in Great Britain decided to free itself from that dictatorship of directives, from that institutionalized bonfire of red tape. However, I dare to say that the possibilities have not yet been fully utilized. And what's even more dangerous will become clear by reference to a quotation of the German Chancellor Scholz recently did when Keir Starmer visited Berlin in end of August. German Chancellor Scholz said, I quote, "I am delighted." If he starts with he's delighted, then it's always dangerous. "I am delighted Keir Starmer has announced he will seek a fresh start in his relationship with the European Union." That's what Keir Starmer said in Germany. Keir Starmer is not just a two-tier Keir, he is also a staunch rejoiner. But Brexit could have been, or still can be, a chance for creating a socially market economy, a socially, not an exclusively major corporation-oriented, 100% uncontrolled free market economy, rather a socially market economy, maybe comparable as Germany had it at the time of its miracle on the Rhine in the 1950s and 1960s. I don't want to say that we didn't have prosperous times before. I simply can't remember many afterwards. Not at all communist, but nevertheless with anti-capitalist elements of, for example, suitable for Great Britain, with anti-capitalist elements of corporativism, regarding which from your soil great minds arose, like, for example, Gilbert Keith Chesterton or Hilaire Belloc, to name just two of them. My respect for that to your country and your people. And Britain would be well advised. Britain would be well advised to use the opportunities of being free from the heteronomy of Brussels. However, that would require other politicians in Westminster, increasingly more and more of a Westmonster. And by the way, a Nigel Farage one-man show will not be sufficient. And to avoid a common misconception, which is presumably not met as often in Great Britain as in the rest of Europe, is Brussels regulative, not to put it more precisely, Brussels strangulating directives dictatorship is anything but a free market. The European Union is, in terms of its deindustrialization policy, a centrally planned economy, however obvious, without any plan. Regarding financial policy, it is the path towards a financial feudalism, or in other words, a stooge of a totalitarian globalist plutocracy. So let's talk about the kind of mainstream establishment responsible for that mess. An ideological do-gooder snobbery as modern times class conflict model between the establishment on the one hand and the indigenous working class on the other hand. Such a snobbery implements the aforementioned plutocracy, fueled by disenfranchised ordinary people who further are burdened by an immigratory proletariat misusing their welfare system. And that's why our political manifestation is a synthesis. It's a synthesis of ethnic preservation as well as welfare and social justice for the working class, but primarily for the indigenous working class, those who are indeed in reality working. Let's be clear. When it's about community, we heard a lot of it, and I'm glad to hear a lot about community today. When it's about community instead of antagonism, a society needs homogeneity, not diversity, period. And that today's financial feudalism, what is that? Financial feudalism is the system where politicians are no longer representatives of the people, but vicarious agents, stooges on the payroll of big money, big tech, big pharma, or whatever chosen circles alike. And I fear we have to learn, in that regard, a lesson, a historic lesson. Again, we have to learn a historic lesson, which is political leaders should never, ever whore themselves into dependency on international finance. And why do I strengthen precisely that aspect? As a German on British soil today, it would be remiss not to remind that it would have been better for our both countrymen if a dubious Henry Strakosch, a representative of a particular faith, had not solved Winston Churchill's debt problems in 1938. So unfortunately, the aforementioned dependency aspect has lost none of its relevance. By the way, in Manchester, where I arrived yesterday, also David Lloyd George was born, who wrote on September 17, 1936, in an article in the Daily Express, I quote, "The Germans have definitely made up their minds never to quarrel with us again." And he was right. That the Germans didn't want and they don't want. And he was one of the appeasement politicians we would need today instead of the governing warmongers we have. No more brothers' wars. Never ever. If anything is of the same importance as the immigration aspect, this is this aspect of no more brothers' wars. Never ever brothers' people should cut their throats. And that's why neither cultural Bolshevik societal deconstruction nor oligarchist financial feudalism shall be the future for our children. And that's why we are in opposition to the prevailing conditions and in the fiercest opposition imaginable. Strictly speaking, we are primarily not a little further to the left or a little further to the right of the establishment. No, but we are in a clear frontal position against the powers that be. We have to think in other, more substantial categories than the divide and conquer system's left-right patterns. And indeed, that's a somehow revolutionary self-conception insofar as our political attitude strives for a fundamental paradigm shift compared to today's devastating agenda of diversity garbage, climate psychosis, and woke lunacy. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are the radical extremists, as finally our intention is restoring a societal environment of natural normality. However, that's just the way it is in that regard, a botched job, just tinkering around the edges, does not in the slightest fix the problems we face. It is not enough to just turn a few small screws when the gravity of problems requires changing the points of leading towards a different direction. The real extremists, therefore, are not in our ranks. Those are I would call them institutional globalists, with their supranational extremism of uprooting all traditionally grown societal structures and economic value creation chains. Maybe one can call us, in that one sense, radicals, in this etymological sense, that we are not just repairing around the symptoms, and that we are strongly determined to prevent the great replacement agenda of deracinating our indigenous ethnic brothers and sisters from their homeland. And I think we are well advised to prefer re-migration instead of replacement. And no matter how many times the system's media synagogues repeat their propaganda nonsense, constant repetition does not turn stupidity into a stroke of genius. Diversity is no strength, and globalism is not the solution, it is the problem. And we have to speak it out clear. There will be never a sustainable economic growth if a country is dominated by just a hand of giant multinationals, none of whom pay any tax onshore. What is required is a regional, a rural entrenchment of the economy instead of globalist free trade extremism. And capital has to serve the people, not oppress them. Further, it is not the purpose of currency and credit system being a commodity for private profit. Our conception of an economy is based on production, not financial engineering. I'm absolutely convinced, knowing the majoritarian answer, if we asked the people if they preferred a productive and innovative or an exploitative economic system. That sounds simple. That's insofar, however, of relevance, because it's as simple as that. A solid, reasonable economic policy is still the best form of a social policy. This is an insight that probably the political left will never grasp, which is, hypothetically spoken, why even in the case of a left-wing government over the Gobi Desert or the Sahara, for sure, within just a few years, they would lack even the sand there. But perhaps an economic collapse is necessary for the resulting hardship to open the eyes of our compatriots. And ultimately, an economy in decline can be rebuilt, provided the particular folks are still around. An altered gene pool, however, is irreversible. So let's never lose sight of the top priority. And as long as we keep in mind what matters first and foremost, we will never become tired of standing up for it and make the necessary and right decisions. We are not only concerned with correcting the current increasingly intolerable shortcomings, but beyond that, we have to set out to eliminate the particular conditions that have allowed such political ills to arise, and by doing so, aiming to establish a more resilient, better political order. However, in this struggle against the left establishment, we have to be aware that the political left is not just lunatic. It is dangerous. An organized dereliction of duty regarding the ethnic sovereign with deeply totalitarian traits, no longer hiding their self-serving and self-obsessed arrogance. So we have to be smart to fight their great deception, to escape their surveillance grip, to withstand their lawfare against dissidents. Moreover, even a downstream left-wing prohibitionist state can no longer fix what left-wing anti-authoritarian education combined with uncontrolled mass immigration breeds out without rules. And when those censorship politicians, like for example the French EU parliamentarian Sandro Gauzy, and he said this really, when those censorship politicians claim, I quote, "Freedom is violence in disguise," quote end, "Freedom is violence in disguise," said Sandro Gauzy, then totalitarianism strikingly, not just in disguise, my friends, strikingly has already become a glaring matter of fact. Let's nip it in the bud. We will never accept that holocausting with freedom of speech. The only one acceptable censorship is the individual's self-determined right not to listen, but never ever to prevent others who want to from listening. I admit it's a risk to speak out, and we heard examples a lot today. It's a risk to speak out. It's a danger to spread the word. However, in the long term, it is a much greater risk to stay silent and not to speak out. And at that point, please allow me, I think it's suitable to quote this man here today, allow me to quote Thomas Carlyle. "Permanence, perseverance, and persistence, in spite of all obstacles, discouragements, and impossibilities, it is this that in all things distinguishes the strong soul from the weak soul," quote end. And I'm really, really happy being here together with so many of such strong souls. Thank you for this. One more, I'm not ready. Let me take up this term, being a patriotic alternative is not just in Great Britain, but all over Europe, the right attitude at the right time. Indigenous people are not fine with the governments any longer. Many of our countrymen are becoming more and more desperate. Therefore, indeed, now is the time. However, in these times when people realize what they are against, it's crucial to complementarily show them what they can be for. And I hope I have already been able to make some hopefully lucid distinctions between the actual and the targeted status quo understandable. Our people will in their suffering at some point, hopefully, take themselves seriously enough to galvanize the legitimate protests. And become aware that diversity is not a strength, not at all, but community is. That's why, and we heard it today, that's why a multitasking strategy, essentially based on community building and networking, will be our roadmap for success. And be always aware, we cannot lose what we don't give up. And I'm convinced that with today, we are one step further. Let's build local networks that enable us to organize our everyday lives in a self-determined and resilient way, and further develop national as well as international communication hubs of solidarity. If we moreover act strategically clever and tactically flexible, then as long as there is no change in power politics, we will at least be able to create an alternative living environment for ourselves, which at any time can, as a role model, become the source of general renewal. And regarding the needed attitude, which this conference fortunately gives proof to me, Thomas Carlyle again. Wondrous is the strength of the cheerfulness and its power of endurance. The cheerful man will do more in the same time, will do it better, will preserve it longer than the sad or sullen. And that's of relevance and crucial due to how we are seen, which is crucial because to a high degree, perception creates reality. Thank you for your kind attention. It feels good to be with you. Long live the patriotic German-British friendship. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.